It is the 3rd of the 3rd, 2025. The time is 4 minutes past 8, and there are very many F1 centric threads at which we need to pull. We'll talk the moment of import that is Sir Lewis Hamilton on Time magazine, what that means statistically, how many drivers have ever been on Time magazine of the F1 variety. So too we'll talk about financial statements because F1 have dropped a bombshell, a fantastic set of financial reports and what that means for the Concord Agreement. So too we'll talk about US TV rights and what F1 are pitching at, seeking to become or at least earn exactly what NASCAR is from their TV rights respectively. We'll talk about testing as well because Red Bull have come out and said some things. We'll talk about the probability of Lando versus Maximilian Verstappen winning a championship of the drivers variety. How do you like yourself some F1? Go on then, let's talk about Time magazine first, because Joe Sayward reports that not too many F1 peddlers have done what Sir Lewis Carl Davidson managed to do in being on the cover of Time magazine even. A moment of import for all things Formula One and motorsport more broadly. Indeed, some say that a rising tide floats all boats. In history, there's only ever been 3 appearances from F1 drivers on the cover of Time. In 1965, it was Jim Clark. In 2016, it was Sir Lewis Hamilton. And in 2024, it was Maximilian Verstappen. 3 times. And again, if you're going to do some statistical analysis going forward, you would argue that there have only been 3 champions of the drivers' variety to have won the F1 title at 40 years or older. There is a weird symmetry there, would say. F1 history doesn't repeat, but sometimes it does rhyme. And of course, for Sir Lewis Hamilton fans around the world, they will be combing through that Time article as we did a couple of videos back. Fantastic. It's incredible. Hearing Lewis talk about the things that he was talking about has to put a smile on your face. That's not to say, though, that the task ahead of him, that the mountain, the hill climb that he's got to get over, that the gradient of it isn't super steep. For the avoidance of doubt, this is historic, no unprecedented settings. But if anyone can do it, some say, then Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton can do it. Let's talk about financial statements, because as far as Formula One's concerned, cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money, dollar bills. Your new financial statements. Last year, revenue was 3.22 billion. I want to say, what are you talking about, Cameron? 3.65 this year. Market cap sits at 30 billion. Ergo, F1 is doing one of these as far as its financial statements, and that bodes well, does it not? All apart from the Concord. How are we going to split those funds? Remember, we have an 11th entry in Cadillac F1, and some say that they're going to have to pay $450 million in terms of dilution fee to the other 10 teams on the grid. Why? Because the 10 teams on the grid have built the house that is F1. They were there in the hard times when there was no Drive to Survive, when nobody was watching Formula One, injecting anywhere up to $400 million in terms of R&D with a view to build the fastest machine that year. So how about that? You're not going to split up my cake. You're not going to come along and live in the house after I've built it with my own bare hands, is what the likes of Christian and Toto the Boy Who Cried Wolf are saying. A new Concord agreement is due to be signed as well. In that, everybody's tuning in to see what it says about dilution fee. 450 million. I would argue F1 in its current form that potentially it will be much more. Oh, and by the way, speaking of much more, you know, ESPN have been having a free ride for the longest time. Many cycles ago, they signed for the US TV rights $5 million a year. 5 million? That's nothing. Now at the latest round, $80 million a year, again by dint of Drive to Survive, by dint of all of the attention dollars globally now being spent on F1 that were not there previously. Now, however, F1 is seeking an increase from $85 million a year dollars to circa 180 for TV rights in North America. ESPN said, you know what, we're old media, gonzo, our operating costs are too high Netflix rumoured to be sniffing around that, though, as a proposition looking to broaden their sports portfolio. You see, they have WWE, a $10 billion deal over 10 years or whatever. It's gangbusters. It's serious money. They understand the value of having a sports series. Therefore, Tyson Jake Paul wasn't too long ago, right? And that did gangbusters, record-breaking numbers too. NFL over Christmas et al. Netflix get the assignment. Word on the F1 curb is that they're sniffing around the US TV rights, and they are the pole sitters. Gonna get techie. Should we talk about some testing? Because again, everybody just wants to talk about testing with a view to understand which one of these teams have the quickest car. Now, I've seen several different variations, but broadly the consensus is something like this. Here you have McLaren atop the pile, better than the rest, not just because of their speed and downforce points in absolute terms, but the drivability. You saw that they've done some sexy things with their suspension with a view to improve the efficacy of anti-dive and anti-squat. It's Rob Marshall, it's FlexiWing. He's the last front wing bender, is he not? Mini DRS. They've got all the tricks, lest we forget, as at the final race, Abu Dhabi, the season finale last year, some would say that they still had the quickest car then. Therefore, all they need to do, some say, is build on that momentum now, and McLaren will have themselves the quickest car of the 10 currently on the grid. Second, some are saying Mercedes. Have you guys heard this? That Mercedes put in the most laps, that they have a car that's now stable. No longer is it a car with a super peaky performance curve that you could only access it when there's a full moon, one of 365 days a year, only in cooler climes. Some people are saying that Mercedes had the second best package. And in third, you will never guess, Scuderia Ferrari. That's the consensus. Talk to the boys and girls over at the race. Ted Kravitz, Craig Slater said it. So that means by default then, in fourth place, we're saying the bulls that are red. And I'm not buying it. I think it's bull feathers. I'm hearing from Pierre Vacher that they had a good session testing day 1, 2 and 3, but it wasn't exactly what they wanted. Reliability was an issue on the second day. Liam Lawson settings now. Maximilian Verstappen tinkering on the third day with the floor experimental settings. They put on a cheeky second front wing that they'd clearly planned and developed with the cheeky slot gap in there. I think it's bull feathers. I'm not buying it at all. I saw that the odds as far as Lando Norris winning the championship, if you're going to run 100 simulations of the championship under the current circumstances, some have Lando Norris winning 40 of those 100. 40? Are you having a giraffe? He's a humongous favourite, lest we forget. The odds going into testing, Lando Norris was anywhere between 28 and 29%. Some say 28.5. Max Verstappen, in stark contrast, wasn't a million miles away, 26.6% recurring. Now, Maximilian Verstappen is 23% versus Lando's 40%. That feels wrong. I smell a rat. That does not pass the eye test for me, nor the bloody sniff test, if again we're going to utilise, leverage our common sense. Here's the plan. Maximilian Verstappen is some say soon to be 5-time champion. You guys have heard me say a gazillion times, and I will repeat it now for the avoidance of doubt. If you're going to beat Max Verstappen in 2025, you're going to need stuff. You're going to need a car. You're going to need operational infrastructure. You're going to need a team that barely makes any mistakes of the strategic or operational variety. And they made a gazillion last year, did they not, McLaren, if memory serves? Hungary, Silverstone, Lando, you're going to need X tie if you want to cover off Lewis. You're going to need Y tie if you want to cover off Max. What is this? Oscar Piastri needs the place back. You're going to need a team, Lando, if you want to win a world championship. What were they on about? Austria, will-to-will combat with Maximilian Verstappen, and Lando, some say, came off second best. It's going to be techie for Lando Norris, but I say all that to say this: if we're gonna leverage some stats, I don't think Max will take WDC, says RJ. Oh, the humanities theory rack in particular, says Cracker Sauce. Go on, get this then. Let's leverage some stats, because some will say that, Cameron, you're just leveraging your bias. You like Max Verstappen and you want him to win. And I had an internal conversation with myself and thought that maybe that's what I'm doing. And we can't do that on this channel, because for the avoidance of doubt, truth and objectivity, we will never sacrifice either one of them at the altar of partisanship and or any other cognitive dissonance worth its metal. Check these stats out then. For those that say that Mercedes are second on the grid ahead of both Ferrari and Red Bull, this gives them some solace. Mercedes, again, testing. Forget the absolute times, right? You should sack them off. You can't read too much into them. It's different loads, it's different weights, different engine modes, and you'd have to normalize for each of those across the board if you're going to take any upshots or takeaways from the timing sheet. However, the winner of testing, some say, is the team that completes the most laps over the course of the 3 days. Red Bull completed 304 laps in total. Liam Lawson's second day was an absolute nightmare, struggling to control a raging bull of a Red Bull car. It was chaos for the chap. You saw him nearly lose it into one of the sections, absorbing too much curb, getting a bit throttle greedy. 304 only, chat. That leaves them 6th. Stake F1 completed more laps in testing than Red Bull, 354. What does that say for the Bulls that are red? McLaren, leaders, pole sitters, some say. 381 laps is how many they completed. Ferrari completed one lap more than McLaren on 382. Williams, the legends that are, completed 395 laps. And the top of your laps completed sheet were Mercedes, who completed 458. That's why people think that Mercedes might be in the running this year. However, we streamed this, didn't we? And I took some notes personally, because on day one, granted, let me preface what I'm about to say with this in the name of balance. Granted, day one, as far as Bahrain as a circuit, Sakir International, day one was the most anomalous as far as the climatic circumstance. It was weird, wasn't it? The second day was cold, and then the third day was super warm. So if you're going to take any takeaways, you shouldn't take them from the first day. However, your timing sheets flashed up as follows, because I remember, if we again trying to compare like for like over long runs, there were 3 sessions that were comparable. 2 sessions on a C2, Max and Lando, 2 sessions on a C3, and we took down the receipt. And again, it's hard to deduce fuel load, so you want to account for the fact that I haven't normalized these proper. But you'll recall on day one, for the longest time, Max sat there in 4th, the only one of the top 14 to be in there by dint of the C2 compound tyre. I think that has to count for something. Lest we forget that McLaren was always the last one to switch on its tyres. In 2024, the story of Max versus Lando was that Max would always pull a lead early on in a stint. Towards the latter end of the stint, Lando Norris would pull that gap back. Concertina effect. Ergo, McLaren always struggled to turn on its tyres, at least as versus the Bulls that are red. So here's the numbers that I took down, and these are important now because we're talking long runs. C2 tyres, the compare goes like this. Max Verstappen, over the course of his long runs, I want to say 7 laps, 33.28. Lando Norris did 33.279. I'm averaging out their quickest laps over the course of their long runs. Average, there were 7 laps I've normalised for. That's a difference of less than 1/1000th chat between the Red Bull of Max Verstappen and the McLaren MCL39 of Lando Norris. These are my numbers. You know, you need to go and fact check, trust but verify. I'm not going to defer to these so-called experts. C3 tyre, here's what we know. Day one, because again, I think this is most reflective. Max had loads of problems on day 3. They were doing all experiments with the floor and a new wing, and it was reliability and this, that, the other. Day 1 though, Max was on it. C3, Lando Norris did a 32 averaging. Again, I want to say it was 11 laps on the C3, and I've actually averaged out their best ones, not normalised for fuel load, etc. But I think we can make the assumption that they're broadly in line. Lando Norris of an average of his 11 laps day one on the C3, 32.87. Max Verstappen, his average was 32.75, meaning therefore that on the C3 tyre on day one, the most anomalous of days of the free in testing, Max Verstappen was a tenth ahead of Lando Norris in that papaya coloured car. You can take that for whatever you will. I know that Pierre Vacher has said, you know what, as far as the evolution of the car, all of the sexy things are happening underneath it. It's Venturi tunnels, it's underneath the front wing. I get it. Copy. Christian Horner said something too. However, there is rumour I'm hearing that potentially Red Bull might rock up at Australia with all of the outside bits looking completely different. You might see the bloody gun barrel engine cover that's so made that was so infamous in 2024. There might be differences, and if past his prologue, you wouldn't put it past Red Bull, eh? They do this, they have done this a gazillion occasions before. Why would they not hide their cards if indeed in that there were doable competitive advantage? Why would they reveal all of their sexy tricks during testing to give the likes of McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes the time to go and develop that themselves? Dr. Obb says as follows. And again, I want to temper this with some balance because it's not all good news as far as Maximilian Verstappen. Let me tell you this, guys. And again, Dr. Obbs, friend of the channel, he says as follows. There's a good article by Jonathan Noble that sums up where Red Bull are at. No one is panicked by any means, but I think it's obvious there's still some work to be done. The car has improved as far as its handling, dynamic, understeer, snap oversteer, but maybe it hasn't improved as much as they'd hoped for. Regarding the aero configuration, Boat San Miguel, is this a Max fan club now? This is a fan club of excellence, par excellence, each and every single time. Dr. Obbs continues. Regarding the different aero configurations during day 3, when they started to tinker with the floor and the floor edge, I had heard that this was planned to mix configure these and do a lot of testing. I don't see this as a concern, but more so a team that was left looking for solutions in 2024, testing those solutions with real track running. Red Bull Racing always has historically been biased to track validation when possible. They have always put lots of faith in this rather than taking risks with CFD and wind tunnel validations only. I just see this as the way that they work. I believe, continues Dr. Obbs, that most are all unified on a McLaren looking the best, but between Ferrari, Red Bull Racing and Mercedes, it looks very tight. It could sway and vary. Mileage may vary from track to track. For Red Bull fans, I think the season won't start with wins. Oof. But we could be there with some healthy updates. Oh, the humanity, Dr. Obbs. Way to destroy my hopes and grit. Listen, I would offer to Dr. Obbs, a dude infinitely more wise in all things, the balls that are red than I would offer Dr. Obbs this. I think I smell ball feathers. As far as all these F1 aficionados are concerned, I think they're underestimating what Red Bull in the hands of Maximilian Verstappen showed on day 1. Yes, the car is temperamental still, super mercurial, twitchy. Yes, it's prone to a cheeky snap oversteer moment and potentially still some understeer. This was what it made it so infamous in 2024. But I would argue, as has Pierre Vacher and Enrico Balbo, that the 2024 car was not a bad car. What it lacked for was not pace, it was drivability. And if they can fix for that, as it looked like they were fixing for it on day 1 when Max Verstappen went in and put the purple sector and Jos Verstappen and the Red Bull team were gleaning, smiling like Cheshire cats. Jos Verstappen I've never ever seen with a bigger smile on his face than when Max Verstappen put that sector 1 in, that purple sector 1. Easy, super accessible, meaning therefore I'm not buying what some F1 aficionados that are selling, that Lando Norris is 40%. That's the probability that he wins the championship as versus Maximilian's 23.5. No, I'm calling ball feathers on it. Sometimes you've got to leverage some Occam's razor. And I think that the most simple explanation here is the most likely. That potentially the Red Bull team are sandbagging. and that they've pulled the wool over all of the aficionados' eyes. They'll be up there competing, if not quickest, in Australia. That's my story and I'm sticking to it, but I digress.